Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome Greta Thunberg to the European Parliament in our Environment Committee. I would also like to welcome the Secretary of State, Madame Chot, from the Romanian Presidency, our team here, members of the European Parliament, and particularly acknowledgement of the presence of Madame Corazza Bildt, who is the coordinator for children's rights in the European Parliament. This is our last plenary and last meeting of the Environment Committee before the May elections, and we could have not concluded our work in a better way than by having with us such an inspiring young advocate of the climate cause as Greta is. There is hardly any need for a detailed introduction of Greta, who is already widely known on many levels. So I'd like to start by thanking her for her unfailing commitment to the topic of climate change and for having accepted the Parliament's invitation to come and share her views in what has been and will continue to be one of the most important topics of our legislative work, and with no doubt one of the most important topics of the elections for the European Parliament lying ahead of us. Greta has traveled a great distance on a train from Sweden during her school holiday to be here with us today, which is by itself already sets an example of her commitments and her beliefs. In the past few years, more than ever, we not only speak, but we see in practical terms the importance of involving actors of all ages and from all levels of the societal ladder in actively contributing to the environmental solutions, but also societal pressure where such solutions are either missing or simply not being delivered. For us in the European Parliament, we know our work. We have been very ambitious, maybe the most ambitious European institution in setting the climate goals for Europe for the years to come. We know that this ambition needs to be supported and continued in the next Parliament's term so that we can answer the challenges lying ahead of us. I won't say much more because we are already a bit delayed, and I know that you are all looking forward to listen to Greta. So with no further ado, I'll give you the floor to address. Do you want to speak seated or do you want to stand? As you wish. She wants to stand. Are you fine? Yeah. Okay. Here's the micro, so you have to speak close to it, huh?
Is it so?
You see, you're a bit far from it.
Yeah.
But we will make it quiet, so we'll
Should I lean
hear you.
forwards?
I think like this is fine.
Okay. My name.
I'm sorry.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 16 years old. I come from Sweden, and I want you to panic. I want you to act as if the house was on fire. I have said those words before, and a lot of people has explained why that is a bad idea. A great number of politicians have told me that panic never leads to anything good. And I agree. To panic, unless you have to, is a terrible idea. But when your house is on fire and you want to keep your house from burning to the ground, then that does require some level of panic. Our civilization is so fragile, it is almost like a castle built in the sand. The facade is so beautiful, but the foundations are far from solid. We have been cutting so many corners. Yesterday, the world watched with despair and enormous sorrow how the Notre Dame burned in Paris. Some buildings are more than just buildings. But the Notre Dame will be rebuilt. I hope that its foundations are strong. I hope that our foundations are even stronger, but I fear they are not. Around the year 2030, 10 years, 259 days and 10 hours away from now, we will be in a position where we set off an irreversible chain reaction that will most likely lead to the end of our civilization as we know it. That is, unless in that time permanent and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society have taken place, including a reduction of our CO2 emissions by at least 50%. And please note that these calculations are depending on inventions that have not been yet invented at scale. Inventions that are supposed to clear our atmosphere of astronomical amounts of carbon dioxide. Furthermore, do these calculations not include unforeseen tipping points and feedback loops, like the extremely powerful methane gas escaping from rapidly thawing Arctic permafrost? Nor do they include already locked-in warming hidden by air pollution, nor the aspect of equity or climate justice clearly stated throughout the Paris Agreement, which is absolutely necessary to make it work on a global scale. We must also bear in mind that these are just calculations, estimations. That means that these points of no return may occur a bit sooner or later than that. No one can know for sure. We can, however, be certain that they will occur approximately in these time frames, because these calculations are not opinions or wild guesses. These projections are backed up by scientific facts concluded by all nations through the IPCC. Nearly every major national scientific body around the world unreservedly supports the work and findings of the IPCC. We are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction, and the extinction rate is up to 10,000 times faster than what is considered normal, with up to 200 species becoming extinct every single day. Erosion of fertile topsoil, deforestation of our great forests, toxic air pollution, loss of insects and wildlife, the acidification of our oceans. These are all disastrous trends being accelerated by a way of life that we, here in our financially fortunate part of the world, see as our right to simply carry on. But hardly anyone knows about these catastrophes or understand how they are just the first few symptoms of climate ecological breakdown. Because how could they? They have not been told. Or more importantly, they have not been told by the right people and in the right way. Our house is falling apart, and our leaders need to start acting accordingly, because at the moment they are not. If our house was falling apart, our leaders wouldn't go on like you do today. You would change almost every part of your behavior, as you do in an emergency. If our house was falling apart, you wouldn't fly around the world in business class chatting about how the market will solve everything with clever small solutions to specific isolated problems. You wouldn't talk about buying and building your way out of a crisis that has been created by buying and building things. If our house was falling apart, you wouldn't hold 3 emergency Brexit summits and no emergency summit regarding the breakdown of the climate and environmental. You wouldn't be arguing about phasing out coal in 15 or 11 years. If our house was falling apart, you wouldn't be celebrating that one single nation like Ireland may soon divest from fossil fuels. You wouldn't celebrate that Norway has decided to stop drilling for oil outside the scenic resort of Lofoten Islands, but will continue to drill for oil everywhere else for decades. It's 30 years too late for that kind of celebrations. If our house was falling apart, the media wouldn't be writing about anything else. The ongoing climate and ecological crisis would make up all the headlines. If our house was falling apart, you wouldn't say that you have the situation under control and place the future living conditions for all species in the hands of inventions that are yet to be invented. And you would not spend all your time as a politician arguing about taxes or Brexit. If the walls of our house truly came tumbling down, surely you would set your differences aside and start cooperating. Well, our house is falling apart, and we are rapidly running out of time, and yet basically nothing is happening. Everyone and everything needs to change, so why waste precious time arguing about what and who needs to change first? Everyone and everything has to change, but the bigger your platform, the bigger your responsibility. The bigger your carbon footprint, the bigger your moral duty. When I tell politicians to act now, the most common answer is that they can't do anything drastic because that will be too unpopular among the voters. And they are right, of course, since most people are not even aware of why those changes are required. That is why I keep telling you to unite behind the science. Make the best available science the heart of politics and democracy. The EU elections are coming up soon, and many of us who will be affected the most by this crisis, people like me, are not allowed to vote. Nor are we in a position to shape the decisions of business, politics, engineering, media, education, or science. Because the time it takes for us to educate ourselves to do that simply does no longer exist. And that is why millions of children are taking it to the streets, school striking for the climate to create attention for the climate crisis. You need to listen to us, we who cannot vote. You need to vote for us, for your children and grandchildren. What we are doing now can soon no longer be undone. In this election, you vote for the future living conditions for humankind. And though the politics needed do not exist today, some alternatives are certainly less worse than others. And I have read that some parties do not even want me standing here today because they so desperately do not want to talk about climate breakdown. Our house is falling apart. The future, as well as what we have achieved in the past, is literally in your hands now. but it's still not too late to act. It will take a far-reaching vision. It will take courage. It will take a fierce determination to act now, to lay the foundations where we may not know all the details about how to shape the ceiling. In other words, it will take cathedral thinking. I ask you to please wake up and make the changes required possible. To do your best is no longer good enough. We must all do the seemingly possible. And it's okay if you refuse to listen to me. I am, after all, just a 16-year-old schoolgirl from Sweden. But you cannot ignore the scientists, or the science, or the millions of school-striking children who are school-striking for the right to a future. I beg you, please do not fail on this.
Thank you very much, Greta.
Mange tak, Greta, for de yderst inspirerende ord. Det er ikke første gang, vi lytter til dig. Og vi beundrer dit mod, og dine ord, de går jo lige i hjertet på os alle, både unge og gamle. Folk generelt, og især politikere, føler sig berørt. Nu har vi et bestemt format. Jeg vil bede koordinatorerne fra de politiske grupper om at udtale sig om emnet. Vi har ikke meget tid til rådighed. Så gør det venligst. Kortfattet, de ved, hvor lang tid de har. Gå ikke ud over deres taletid. Peter Lise først.
Chair, thank you, Greta, for your visit here in the European Parliament and the very inspiring speech. And I think it's of particular importance that you represent not only yourself, but hundreds of thousands of young people that are now pushing us to do more for the climate. I met a lot of them in my constituency, and I was very impressed by the 14-year-old Paul. Paul already for 3 years engages in his spare time for fighting climate change. And I think you, Paul, and all the others, they don't deserve these nasty words, these offenses that come mainly from elderly people. They deserve support. Yeah, you can applaud. And of course, there is this big debate, should you do it during school time or not? No. I was also, during my school time, asked even by my teacher to go on the street and to fight for the support for private schools in Germany. And I did so, and I think what you are doing is much more important. So I will not hide my position. In the long run, of course, it should be done also outside the school time, but this is not the topic. And even in school, you get not a very good degree if you only speak about what is not the topic. The topic is climate change. And climate change is probably the biggest challenge for our political generation. This is not my words, this is the words of our chairman, Manfred Weber, when we ratified the Paris Agreement. And that's why we need to do something, we need to do much more. Even if we are not always of the same opinion, I think it's important for me to say, okay, Europe is not doing enough, all the member states are not doing enough, but it is important that without Europe, we wouldn't have even the Paris Agreement. And these are not my words. These are the words from Todd Stern, the former chief climate advisor of President Barack Obama. He was here in the European Parliament. He said, without Europe, we would be nowhere. So push us to do more. but also see that without Europe, we wouldn't be at least in this position. For the future, I have two important issues, and I hope you and your fellows, your like-minded young people, we can work together. We want to be climate neutral. European Commission has presented a strategy. European Parliament has supported this, but the member states are not yet ready. And we need the member states to do something concrete, to do action. And that's why I think we should work together to push the heads of states, the heads of government. They need to do something to become climate neutral, and not only discussing next year, but starting now. And the second point, which is very close to my heart, and which I'm addressed in my constituency by school children every week. Why is aviation not doing more to help our climate? It is completely unfair that when you go by train, when you go by bus, you pay a lot of taxes and fees. And when you go for aviation, aviation has only to contribute 15% under the emission trading. 15%, 85% of the allowances they get for free. The European Parliament is in favor for changing this, but even in the Commission and in the Council, there are people that think this is already too much. And I think we need to do more, and we cannot, in these circumstances, discuss even about abolishing some responsibility that the aviation industry has. We need to do more, and I hope we can work together with all the young people for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lees. And our next speaker is Mrs. Daly.
Greta, thank you for being here. I'm representing the Socialists and Democrats, but I'm also here as a mother of two children, one aged 5 years and another one aged 2 years. And when you share your concern on the future that people your age and even younger people will have, I feel the same remorse and the same feelings that you are getting. Because today you see here around you a room full of people who are cheering what you are saying. But unfortunately, it's not always like this, in the sense that when we come to the crunch of it, when we come to specific legislations that can actually deliver, we end up discussing things which try to shoot down ambition. So it's not the first time, and I'm sure that colleagues following me can also speak from their experience. It's not the first time that when we are discussing real legislations that can make a difference, we end up shooting down and going back from that ambition because of pressure also from different lobbyists. I'm saying this after I worked on the legislation to reduce CO2 emissions from passenger cars and light commercial vehicles, but I'm sure that colleagues have other experiences as well that they can speak about. And you say you are just a schoolgirl of 16 years of age. I come from Malta, the smallest island state European Union, and it's not about the age or where you come from, but it's about the determination to actually make a change and actually push for that change to happen. And from what I saw when I was following you, and from what I'm seeing today, that determination you have, and you have a lot of that determination, and it is leaving an impact on many other students around the world, not only students, but also the older generation. I've seen young people going out in the streets, even in my country, to actually make the voice heard when it comes to climate inaction. You say that as a 16-year-old, you're not allowed to vote. And there are some member states that are allowing 16-year-olds to vote. And I think that we need to make much more of a pressure on that. Malta is one of those countries, Austria is another country. This is not a decision for people who are older in age, but decisions in elections are taken and will have an impact on people who today are 16-year-olds and in 5 years' time will be 21-year-olds. You are the ones who will take the brunt of the decisions that are taken today. And I'm taking this opportunity because I believe that even as European Parliament, we need to make sure that we push for young people your age to actually have a voice in the decisions that are taken. And I'm glad to hear my colleagues say that climate change is the biggest challenge, because I believe that it is the biggest challenge we have and that we need to actually act on it. And if I may, away from the camera lenses and the camera flashes that we are seeing today, I wish, like, we all realize that this is not only about words, but it is about action, because if we do not care of our planet, we will not have economies to take care of or jobs to take care of. And I'm saying this because many times we hear also leaders of countries within the European itself making nice speeches, but then not actually acting upon those speeches. And my colleague was quoting some different people. I would like to close off with a quote you said recently, because it is a quote that remained impressed in my mind. You said we must hold the older generations accountable, and they cannot continue risking our future. We need to get angry, and then we have to transform that anger into action. And it is that action we actually require to actually change things for the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Demesmaeker.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I will speak in my mother tongue, if I may. So I will speak in Dutch. Ja, ik vertegenwoordig de ECR.
So I represent the ECR group here. I'm a father and a grandfather. I would like to welcome you here to the European Parliament. You have set things in movement. You really have. We've got a lot of young people who are very enthusiastic and are working hard to combat climate change. In Flanders, a lot of people are in the street as well, and I welcome this commitment on the part of young people. Now, I think that political commitment also does start from our concern, Green for Flanders, and goes back to the 1980s. And I think that there's still some of that action left 30 years later. And there has been a lot of work done to contribute to climate protection, and there's the work that's been done to reduce use of plastics as well. And that we have this energy package, and this week we'll be voting on the first CO2 law in relation to vehicles, and I think that the economy and the ecology have to be reconciled through realistic and ambitious targets. That's the only way, really. My party and my group will do what it can to achieve this energy transition, and our policy is not just a policy to protect the climate and the environment, but we want to protect jobs as well. There has to be innovation and creativity. We need to be able to do what we can to adapt and to adjust, and I'm sure that we can do that. We need our young people for that, to come up with new solutions, to do more to achieve a circular economy. And I regret the defeatist attitude on the part of many people. I think that every day people are working to find solutions, and they are finding solutions that can help to combat climate change. And in my own country, there is the Leuven University working hard to come up with solutions in relation to getting the moisture and harnessing the moisture from the air. That is one example, but there are many others. There's biotechnology, and there's nuclear energy as part of the energy mix as well. I think there is so much that can be done, and all this is very good. But of course, we need a global challenge to rise to this environmental challenge. And I think that young people do have that force of innovation, and that they will do more, carry on doing more to convey the messages to everyone else.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Torvalds. 3 minutes, Mr. Torvalds.
You can keep your headphones on because I'm going to speak in Greta's native tongue. Hey, Greta.
Hello, Greta, and welcome to the European Parliament. It would be a bit more fun if my name was Hansel, because then we would be Hansel and Greta stepping out into the big forest, trying to make life difficult for the Wicked Witch of climate change. Unfortunately, Hansel is not my name. My name is Nils. I'm called Nicke, and I'm sure, as you can hear from my accent in Swedish, that I'm from Finland. I sound a bit like what the Swedes usually say the Moomin Trolls sound like. Now, you've come to the right place. Because if there is one European institution that does try to change life, when we talk about climate and the environment, then this is the place. We will be making all the important decisions in the future as well. And we will be able to make the reality that you mentioned our future. I usually say that I'm not here for my own benefit. I'm here for my grandchildren. I have 3 grandchildren, they're slightly older than you. And I have 3 other grandchildren who are a bit younger than you. And if when I now go home to Finland, at least my eldest grandchild will ask me whether I actually spoke to Greta. And I can now say, yes, I did. I promised to become a better grandfather and a better parliamentarian in trying to deal with these tasks. Now, for the past 5 years, we have taken a number of important decisions. And you're probably right when you say that we haven't done enough. But we have tried to become stricter on the emissions trading. We have tried to make commitments in terms of transport and construction to make it easier to reach our targets. We have made decisions on land use. We've fought with our friends here around the table about emissions from vehicles. But then we have a very specific problem. We all were fairly much in agreement that we need electric vehicles in the future, but if they are being fueled with dirty electricity, then they actually lead to more emissions than diesel-fueled cars. So this means that we need to put a great deal of effort into overhauling our electricity supply system, and that will be one of our big challenges over the coming years. I do promise you one thing. I will visit you in Sweden when we have made the decisions that you demand of us. It may not be tomorrow or the day after. It may take us some years. But I think, as you can hear from the rounds of applause here, that everyone here thinks that you're doing the right thing, and we want to support you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Eickhout.
Welcome, Greta Thunberg, and thank you. I know you hate it when politicians thank you, but for one thing I really want to thank you is that we know that the upcoming elections will be about climate change. Today, another poll was released indicating that a big majority of European citizens, for them to go to the voting booth for the European elections, will be on the basis of climate change. And this is really partly because of all your great work and all the students and the Fridays for Future. And that is something that we have to thank you for, certainly coming from a Green Party where we've been fighting this issue for a long while and not always been as successful as you would have liked to see. And maybe that is now I can turn to my colleagues. And of course I could now turn very cynical in looking at the past, in all the different votes that we had, all the different discussions we had. And I didn't notice that urgency that much as we see it today in the room. But maybe it's better to look forward with all of us here. When we are, in July, going to vote on the new president of the European Commission, and a lot of you will come back, everyone hopes. I hope that everyone will remember this day, when we were applauding Greta Thunberg for her speech, talking about that the world is at stake. But that also means that we have then to look at the programme of the new European Commission, whether they really want to change policies. policies to phase out coal, policies to put a real price on carbon, policies to make aviation really pay, policies to make sure that the European budget doesn't pay 1 cent to fossil fuels, policies that is really greening our agriculture, which we have not done until now. And thank you for the applause, but I want your vote on that programme of the new President of the European Commission in July, because then only that applause really means something. And now I turn to the Commissioner, because you still can have one chance. In September, you will go to New York, to the UN Summit on climate change. Today is a good moment. You can promise that you will go to New York, where you will promise to say Europe will increase its climate target for 2030. Are you going to do that? And for the presidency, because you will have your Future of Europe summit in Sibiu on the 9th of May, will you make sure that in that summit, indeed, the Council and all the member states will adopt its climate-neutral plan for 2050, including an update and an increase of our emission targets for 2030. Only then this meeting has been successful, because then we really put words into action here at the Council and at the Commission. And thank you for that, Greta Thunberg.
Thank you, Mr. Eickhout. Now for 3 minutes, Madam Boylan.
Hi, Greta. I'm Lynn Boylan. I'm representing the GUE NGL group. And I can't say how pleased I am to see you here today, because the events of the last month have probably summed up the contradictions that we have in EU climate policy. Because the political groups that wanted to stop you from addressing them are the same political groups that have decided against revoking access to ExxonMobil to the Parliament. You speak truth to power, Greta. ExxonMobil spent millions subverting the truth. Vested interests, we know, have captured the political majority. They have convinced them that we can tackle climate change while maintaining perpetual growth. And already we know that we are using more resources than is sustainable. The World Bank and the OECD are telling us that we can still grow by 3% per year. This is madness. It is absolute absurdity. The economy cannot be treated as a separate entity in its own right, unconnected to everything else. We cannot leave nature out of the conversation when we talk about tackling climate change, because climate change is the biggest crisis that we're facing in humankind, and we have to stop listening to the corporate interests and instead, as Greta said, unite around the science. And I have listened with great interest to what you have said today, Greta, and you mentioned my own country, Ireland, and how it is divesting from fossil fuels. But while it's divesting from fossil fuels, it's still issuing extraction licences to fossil fuel companies. It's still forging ahead with an LNG gas terminal. So what you want from all of us who are in this room, the people who have the political mandates, is to fight for the emergency response to climate change. That's, I assume, what you came here today, not to be patronised, not to have us all nod in agreement. You want us to act on the political mandate that we've been given and to take deep, far-reaching measures that are required. And that means leaving fossil fuels in the ground. It does not mean pumping millions of EU euros into gas infrastructure. It means ramping up our ambitions so that we stay within the 1.5 degrees in climate change. If we can have emergency conferences for banking crisis and Brexit, we can have it for climate change too. We need a credible path that leads us towards carbon net neutrality well before 2050. We need less extractive production, less consumption. We want localisation over globalisation. In other words, it's time that the EU powered down. So I commend you, Greta, for the stance that you've taken and the inspiration that you've given to young people across the world, including in all of the EU countries. And as I said, I say that to not patronise you. And I say it sincerely, that I must do better as an elected rep, but every single one of us in this room must do better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Pedicini, just 2 minutes.
Grazie. I will speak in Italian, so put on your headphones. Bene, grazie Greta.
Thank you very much, Greta. I'd like to thank you indeed for your presence and for what you had to say, and also involving everybody in this particular discussion, and I think this is absolutely necessary. Thank you so much. And I'd like to mention that, of course, this has been done by a young girl who's living the life of a young girl, and she has brought forward all of these particular issues to all of us. And I think, indeed, it's absolutely necessary to understand that there are so many falsehoods behind all of this particular discussion that's taken place. In other words, so much has been concealed with regard to all of this, and nothing has been done. Nothing has been done before. And indeed, your words and your contribution is extremely important on this particular front. So, panic, I think, really, as you said, this is a moment for panic in many, many ways. We have to look at all that is out there. We have to look at the issues that are there, and we have to fight against them, fight against cars, fight against all of these emission-producing mechanisms that have been. This entire structure has to be gotten rid of. And a young girl brings before us these particular issues, and indeed we have to be ever so grateful to you, Greta, for bringing forward these issues that nobody has mentioned. Thank you.
2 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Comme souvent dans...
Thank you very much, Chair. As often in human life, excesses in one direction are followed by excesses in the opposite direction. I think that your generation is aware of the damage that has been caused by the previous generations, and this is a very good thing. It's absolutely essential. But I think that we had the industrialization and intense farming aimed at trying to achieve as much profit as possible. But I think that we don't want this to be followed by an opposite excess. Let's be reasonable here. I think we're right to be have indignation, but we have to be measured in our words. We have to base ourselves on science, and we cannot be based on shock sentences and on our emotions alone. I think that we have to be aware of disinformation, and we have to be we protect ourselves as well from lobbying and from the finance world. I think that we have to have excellence. We have to aim at that. Otherwise, we can be ridiculous. I think that we can't get it wrong today, and we have got it wrong in the past. Sometimes we have to avoid all form of hysteria. We really do. We mustn't be irresponsible at all. Now, the last report by the French Agronomy Institute in relation to carbon footprint of forests drew attention to the fact that there was a lack of reliable calculations. We do have to take measures, but we have to invest in innovation, that's true, but we have to take account of economic balances. We have to take over SMEs, and we have to take account of jobs as well. We have to save jobs, so we are relying on your generation. We're counting on your generation to do more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the round of speakers on behalf of the political groups. And now I'd like to invite the representative of Romanian Presidency, the State Secretary, Madam Ciot, to commit to increase the national determined contributions in this Sibiu summit, as this House repeatedly insisted upon. So, Madam Ciot, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the European Parliament for inviting the Romanian Presidency to this meeting. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to salute Ms. Greta Thunberg, for her engagement in the fight against climate change and for raising awareness about the issue, particularly among other young people, and the responsibility that we have for our planet and for our citizens, especially the future generations. More than just launching a movement and inspiring a generation, you are also awakening the consciousness of older generations, including the parents, teachers, politicians, and decision makers of this world. We are all aware of the scale and urgency of the challenges posed by the climate change. We are already witnessing the devastating impacts on climate change all over the world. And yet, as Greta has pointed out many times, action to prevent irreversible and catastrophic climate disruption remains insufficient. This was unequivocally confirmed by the IPCC special report, Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Without stepping up global climate action, global average temperature increase could reach 2 degrees Celsius soon after 2060 and continue rising afterwards. It is therefore urgent to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change, and the European Union is determined to help raise global action and lead the way. At the meeting of the European Council last month, our heads of state and government reiterated the EU's commitment to the Paris Agreement. The European Union, with its present ambitious policy framework, continues to lead the way on climate action. It is broadly on track to achieve its 2020 greenhouse gas, renewable energy and energy efficiency targets. It has also agreed on ambitious targets for further reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and those targets have now been translated into EU legislation. In particular, those laws will ensure continued emission reductions in the industrial and power sector and ambitious binding national reduction targets for all EU member states in other sectors, such as buildings, transport and waste. Combined with other sectoral policies, for example, concerning the development of renewable energy, energy efficiency requirements and carbon dioxide emission standards for motor vehicles, this guarantees that the EU will achieve its 2030 targets of reducing its greenhouse gas emission by at least 40% compared to 1990, and thus also fulfill its nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. With a view to the preparation of the EU's long-term strategy, the Council is currently discussing a communication presented by the Commission. In the communication, the Commission analyses various scenarios for long-term emission reductions. Those pathways would achieve greenhouse gas emissions reduction ranging from 80% to 100% within the EU by 2050. The communication is actively debated within the Council. The Romanian presidency wishes to enable as broad and comprehensive debates for all relevant sectors: environment, energy, transport, industry and competitiveness, agriculture and finance. The ministerial debates held so far have highlighted the fact that there is a shared recognition of the need for action. The European Council has also emphasised the importance of the EU submitting an ambitious long-term strategy by 2020, striving for climate neutrality in line with the Paris Agreement. Moving toward a low-carbon economy will require major changes. We need to be managed carefully in order to ensure that the transition is a just and socially balanced way for all. The Council will continue and intensify its discussion on the long-term vision. We also look forward to the high-level events planned at international level in 2019, which provide an opportunity to mobilize political will to raise global ambition, such as the UNFCCC Secretary General Climate Summit in September 2019. Which brings me to the end of my comments, whereby I would again like to thank the Parliament for organising this discussion. I close by a special thanks to Greta for being the inspiration and for spreading the message about climate change. You have also helped to give a voice to the concerns of the young people, notably by sparking the now famous school strikes for climate, which have spread around the world. I hope and believe that those strikes will become unnecessary, as increasing global and EU action against climate change will help to put us on the right path toward the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. Europe and the world will need bright, well-trained and committed young people to build a climate-neutral future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your commitment and the recognition of Europe's role. Commissioner Arias Cañete, thank you for joining us today at this meeting with Greta Thunberg. You are responsible for putting forward so much decisive legislation to tackle the climate change topic, so you have the floor.
Madam President, honourable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Greta Thunberg not only for coming today to the European Parliament, but also for giving face and voice to our young people taking to the streets in growing numbers, demanding more climate action. We are calling for more action now, and rightly so, because the urgency is clear. You want us to act, and rightly so, because by the time your generation will be in the driving seat, in politics, in public service, in business and elsewhere, it will be too late to stop climate change. Your message is very clear, and we listen to you very clearly. To me, your message is an encouragement to do more, and for that, I thank you. We in Europe have claimed leadership in this, and we must assume it in full. We have acted, we continue to act, but now we must act more and faster. We have based our action on the latest available science, and we have always sought to foster multilateral solutions to global problems. Thanks to our commitment, we now have the Paris Agreement, and this means a multilateral consensus to contain global rise in temperature to well below 2 degrees and to make efforts to stay at 1.5. But we also know that there is a major gap between the goals of the Paris Agreement and the current efforts to achieve them. The bad news is that science tells us that staying at 1.5 will mean painful adaptation, but we will still leave us with a world we would recognise. It tells us that accepting 2 degrees would mean an already very different and very difficult world. And beyond this, science tells us that the youth of today would live in a world we would not recognise. These are the inescapable implications of the IPCC special report on 1.5 from last October. But the good news is that the same IPCC report also tells us that pathways towards well below 2 degrees and even 1.5 are still possible. This is possible if we decide to start now the deep transformation of our economy and our society that scientists tell us is necessary. The report concluded that to be on a pathway to 1.5 with no limited overshoot, human-induced CO2 emissions need to drop to net zero around 2050, and the world needs to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions, what we call climate neutrality, sometime between 2060 and 2080. To achieve this, it is clear that developed industrialized nations should reach climate neutrality very much earlier. It is for this reason, and building on action already taken, mainly the recently adopted European Union legislation to achieve our objectives for 2030, that the Commission has proposed to make the European Union economy CO2 negative before 2050 and to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions climate neutrality by 2050. Our young generation asks us to act according to science, and the European Commission has delivered. And your active mobilisation is and will continue to be an essential support to our common action. I am very satisfied that the European Parliament already endorsed the objective of climate neutrality by 2050. And I look forward to hearing the same from the European Council when they will discuss this issue in their meeting in June 2019. And Mr. Eickhout, you can be sure I will spare no effort to achieve that. Yes. But I also trust that this debate will happen everywhere, and not only in our institutions, because changing our economic system requires active democratic participation. And this is all the more important as we approach the European Parliament elections, and it matters to Europeans. As Mr. Eickhout pointed out, a new poll released today shows that as many as 77% of potential voters identify climate change as an important criterion when deciding who to vote for at the May European elections. These elections offer the opportunity for Europe's political parties, for their Spitzenkandidaten, to put climate action at the centre of their campaigns and to explain to our citizens, also to our young generations, what has already been achieved and what more we still need to do. And it is urgent that Europe, the European institutions, member states, civil society and business agree on an objective of climate neutrality by 2050 at the latest before the end of the year. And it is urgent because we may have 30 years left to achieve it, but we only have the next years to develop and decide the actions and policies that we need and start the massive investments that this transformation requires in many aspects of the European society. We have legislated ambitious standards to cut emissions from road transport. We have legislated on renewables, energy efficiency. We have changed our electricity markets. But we know that we must go further, and that these targets and obligations, we must go further than these targets and obligations if we are to go climate neutral by 2050. And we also know that we must find the right pace for transition as fast as we can, but at the same time we have to preserve and enhance the conditions for the prosperity of our citizens and ensure that the transition is fair and that no region, no worker, no citizen is left behind. Both science and our own analysis show that all of this is possible. We will succeed. We will offer other countries an effective model to stop climate change without sacrificing prosperity and development. Every generation has a critical global issue to face, whether war, peace and reconciliation, the quest for democracy, nuclear disarmament, global hunger or the ozone hole. Climate change is the issue of our generation. So my message to you, young Europeans, is please keep up the pressure. Keep raising your voices for the climate, the voices that we carefully have listened to today in the European Parliament. Keep engaging with decision makers in all European Union countries on how we in Europe will make the transition to climate neutrality a reality. Keep it up so that our generation will rise to your expectation. It's our future, but most importantly, it's your future.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for coming to our last environment meeting. It was really spectacular, and I think it's the right way to finish a very hard and important work we had in the Parliament in this mandate. See you in the next one with stronger forces to fight for climate and to engage as many young people as possible into our next future work. Thank you, Greta, for coming, and good luck with your endeavors. Now we finish. We have to run for a